Welcome to Secret Story. I want to tell the tale of how I got involved in the amazing exploits of Lupe, my uncle's second wife, when I stayed at their guest house, on the Pacific coast of Colombia, in South America. But I must give you some background first. I had graduated from university here in London and had then taken a year out traveling around the world. On my travels across Europe and Asia, I had pursued my passion for photographing the natural world. I had set up a website and posted updates almost every day, and sometimes posted videos to my YouTube channel also. When I had returned, I had bummed around London for a few months, picking up a few photography jobs when I could. Living back at home with my parents became a bit of a grind, but I certainly couldn't afford to move out yet. I needed some freedom as I had had on my travels, but all my savings had gone. I kept searching online for photographic assignments that might take me away from a grimy, cold and wet November in London. Eventually, I saw one that was perfect for me. I went for an interview with the publisher. They had seen my website and YouTube channel and seemed quite impressed with me. I showed them more recent stuff I had done in London too, and they immediately offered me the assignment. I was to photograph the various flora and fauna along the Pacific coast of Colombia. It was a 2-month assignment. As what they wanted was quite extensive, and they knew travel around this remote area was sometimes difficult. In fact, because of their interest in my YouTube channel, they had actually added a video content requirement into the assignment. The reason I had been so interested in this particular assignment, over the many others that I had seen, was that I had an uncle who had moved out to South America when I was just a boy. He had eventually settled in the same area this assignment required me to photograph. I had seen my Uncle Jerry a few times since his big move when he would pop back to the UK. I had always got along with him, far more than I did with my own father. After getting the job, I had eventually managed to get a message to him. Uncle Jerry was delighted I was coming out to Colombia and said I could stay with him. I had imagined he meant in his house, but in a subsequent message I discovered he owned a guest house, and I could stay there but would have to pay for a room. But as the weekly rent was very cheap, I didn't mind that at all. The money the publisher had offered me was pretty good I had thought, especially for a 23-year-old guy, not long out of university. When I told my parents how much I would be making, they seemed to think it was a very good offer indeed. They would also pay for all my expenses, as I did not have a lot of savings, or credit cards. They had agreed to send my expenses to me up front once a week. 2 weeks later I was traveling halfway across the world. It would take one very long flight to Bogota, and then another onto the city of Buenaventura. This was the biggest town actually on the Pacific coast in Colombia. It had the port, but apart from this was a fairly unremarkable town. I stopped over here for a few nights to get my bearings, staying in the hotel the publisher had set up for me. The publisher had planned for me to be based out of Buenaventura for the whole 2 months. Their plan for me was to then travel along the coast to various small towns each week, find somewhere to stay there, get my photos, and then get back to Buenaventura for the weekend. This was due to the fact there was no internet service in any of these remote areas along the Pacific coast. I would need to return to Buenaventura to send my photos and videos over the available internet service there. However, my uncle lived in a much smaller town about 50 miles north of Buenaventura. Eventually, the publisher had agreed I could base myself out of my uncle's town, as long as I traveled to Buenaventura at least once a fortnight to update them over the internet service there with my photos. This seemed a fair compromise. After my few days in Buenaventura, I took a small ferry boat up the coast to the town where my uncle now lived. The trip took about 2 hours. And I arrived in the late afternoon sun. When the ferry docked, my uncle was waiting for me on the small pier. We hugged as I stepped off the boat, a real bear hug from my uncle. We had not seen each other for over 5 years. "Geez. You got big, kid," Uncle Jerry said, looking me up and down. He had always called me kid. Whether it was now an appropriate nickname for a 23-year-old guy or not I wasn't sure, but I wasn't going to argue with him. Uncle Jerry was a tall, big bear of a man, but perhaps had put on a few pounds since I'd seen him last, I thought. He definitely had a real beer belly on him now. He was also slightly balding, with a few gray whiskers in his stubble. But I guess he was now almost 60, so the middle-aged spread had begun many years ago. Uncle Jerry helped me with my bags, and we put them in the back of his little red Jeep parked by the side of the quay. As we drove through the town, he told me his wife was waiting back at the guest house to cook us my first Colombian home-cooked meal. Uncle Jerry had been married once before, to my Aunt Diane. She had gone with him when he initially moved to South America all those years ago. I recall overhearing my parents talking about Uncle Jerry and an affair, and his marriage had ended. Aunt Diane had eventually returned to England. Around 4 years ago I had been told Uncle Jerry had married again. To a Colombian woman. However, my parents and I knew nothing about her, not even her name. After a 10-minute drive, we arrived outside Uncle Jerry's guest house. The sign outside read, Casa Madre. It looked a little run down from the outside, a little dilapidated. I wasn't sure what kind of accommodations I had agreed to stay at. The building was in a large U shape, with the open end of the U at the street side. It was a 2-story construction. 2 staircases ran up from the street end to the second floor above, where a wide veranda ran the length of each side, in front of the rooms behind. Downstairs, in between each side of the U-shaped building, was a fairly wide courtyard area. There were rooms off the courtyard downstairs on each side, and rooms off the 2 verandas on each side upstairs. Uncle Jerry led me through the courtyard to the other end of the building. Peeking through the windows in the rooms downstairs, it didn't much like the look of them. "How many rooms to rent do you have here, Uncle?" I asked as I struggled with my bags. 24 rooms, he replied, but don't worry, we have fully renovated 5 of the rooms upstairs so far. You'll be staying in one of those. It's much nicer than the ones down here. How long have you had this place, Uncle? I inquired. Oh, a few years now, kid. But it's turned into a bit of a money pit, I'm afraid. He explained, so I'm not only glad to see you, but I'm also glad of the income. Uncle Jerry laughed, slapping me on the back. We had now crossed the length of the courtyard, and I noticed this end of the guest house looked different to the rest. No doors were going into individual guest rooms here. There was just one big wooden door in the center. My uncle opened the large door and welcomed me in. Now I realized the end of the guest house had been converted into a separate nice-sized family home. There was a comfy lounge area, and modern kitchen diner off to the left. I dropped my bags by the door. I guessed my uncle was living here in this section with his wife and presumably renting out the rest of the rooms to guests. Lupe. Lupe. Come and meet my nephew, Uncle Jerry called out. I heard footsteps on the floor above, and then down the stairs appeared one of the most gorgeous women I had ever seen. She wore a white dress, with little red cherries printed on it. The dress was very short. It was also strapless at the top. She had jet black, shoulder-length hair, and big hoop sparkly earrings. She was an absolutely gorgeous. I noticed a cute little beauty spot, about an inch to the side of her mouth. She had big full lips too, very enticing. I guessed she was about 5 feet 3 inches tall, and in her mid-30s. Certainly, my uncle was punching way above himself. Lupe, this is the kid, Uncle Jerry said. Kid, this is my wife Lupe. I'm very pleased to meet you, ma'am, I said, extending my hand to shake hers. Ma'am. Oh, Jerry, you didn't tell me your nephew was so polite, Lupe said smiling, taking my hand, and holding on to it. Jerry, I do like nice polite English man, why can't you be like that, huh? She laughed, and we all laughed along with her. I instantly loved Lupe's accent. I noticed when she said my uncle's name, she pronounced it as Jerry, not Jerry. It was cute. Well, I can't call you kid, can I? Lupe giggled. Ah no, Jack is fine, I replied. Yes, okay. Jack, it is, Lupe stated. I nodded, agreeing. I noticed she also pronounced my name as Yak, not Jack. But I, of course, did not point that out to her. Should I call you Aunt Lupe? I inquired. Oh no, that makes me feel old, Lupe giggled, but you probably think of Yeri's first wife as your aunt. Don't worry about ma'am, you just call me Lupe, okay? Lupe held my arm for some time as she asked me about my journey before my uncle suggested we sit in the kitchen. I sat at the table, whilst my uncle opened the fridge. You want a beer, kid? Uncle Jerry asked. I explained I didn't drink alcohol, that I would prefer a soft drink. Oh, you hear that, Yeri? Lupe said, smiling, you could take a leaf out of his books, no. You don't drink? Geez, kid, I don't know, my uncle said, shaking his head. Sipping on a beer as he handed me a Coke, I mean, what do you do, kid? Hey, you leave him alone, Yeri, Lupe warned, shaking her finger at her husband. Now, I hope you like fish, Jack. Yes, of course, I replied. Lupe began preparing our meals, as my uncle and I chatted and caught up. He asked about back home in England and his brother. I answered all his questions and caught him up with all the family gossip. However, I couldn't really give him my full attention. Whenever my uncle glanced away, I would check out Lupe. She looked so good. My uncle asked me all about my plans here, and exactly what my employers expected of me. I explained my assignment, and Lupe would chip in with comments too. She seemed interested in what I was going to be doing. Lupe then again had to bend over to pick up a fork she had dropped, but this time she was facing me. Just as she began to stand straight again, she looked up in my direction. I began to look away innocently, but she had caught me. As my eyes moved back to look at my uncle, I thought I saw a tiny grin appear on Lupe's face, but it was right out of the corner of my eye, so I couldn't be sure. At least my uncle didn't seem to have noticed, as he was telling me one of his long, rambling, but often quite funny stories. Soon Lupe was bringing over plates with fish, coconut rice, and patacons, and we all sat around the kitchen table and dug in. It was delicious, and I complimented Lupe on her excellent cooking. Ah, thank you, Jack, isn't he sweet? Lupe smiled at her husband. And may I compliment you, uncle, on your fabulous wife, I said cheekily. Oh. And a sweet mouth too, Lupe laughed, jokingly putting her finger on my lips. Uncle Jerry laughed too, as did I. Yep, she's a real knockout, ain't she, kid? Uncle Jerry said, sipping on his beer. Lupe scolded her husband, but jokingly, slapping him on his leg. Uncle Jerry pulled Lupe closer and gave her a big kiss on the lips. Lupe then gave him a peck on the cheek. Yes sir, I agreed. How could I not agree? This woman was an absolute goddess. I wondered if Uncle Jerry's affair that my parents had mentioned all those years ago was with Lupe. Perhaps he had left Aunt Diane for Lupe. Surely any man would have if they had the opportunity. How about you, kid? Uncle Jerry asked, you got a girlfriend back home? Ah no, not right now, uncle, I replied shyly. Well, we're gonna have to change that, right Lupe? Uncle Jerry said. What do you mean, Yeri? Lupe asked, looking innocently at her husband. I mean there's plenty of girls in town he could hook up with, right? Uncle Jerry continued, I'm sure lots of them would want to try out a nice polite English boy, huh? Well, I don't know, maybe. He is quite handsome, Lupe said, smiling, and reached out to feel my upper arm, and fit too. Yes, they will like you, Jack. But how is your Spanish? Un poco, I told her. Stating I knew a little. Un poco. Well, that should be enough to get you started. Most of the local girls don't speak much English, I'm afraid, Lupe explained. But your English is so very good, Lupe, I told her, as she finally let go of my bicep. Ah, thank you, Jack. Yes, I worked for an American company in Bogota during my 20s, so of course, we needed good English there, Lupe replied. Maybe we'll take the kid along whenever they have the next one of those talent contests in town, Uncle Jerry suggested. They always got plenty of young women there. Lupe got up from the table and began clearing away the plates. Well, what kind of girls you like, kid? Uncle Jerry asked as Lupe moved to clear away his plate. Well. I mumbled, not sure what to say. You're probably like me, Uncle Jerry laughed. It runs in the family, it always has Yeri. Behave, Lupe scolded her husband again, softly smacking the top of his head. I'm sorry, Jack. Your uncle has had too many beers, no? Nonsense, woman, Uncle Jerry laughed. As Lupe turned to take the plates over to the kitchen counter. Okay, enough. Lupe giggled. You're embarrassing, Jack. Lupe went about cleaning the dishes. I offered to do it for her, but she wouldn't hear of it. Talk turned to Uncle Jerry's various businesses. He told me he had a workshop not far from town, where he overhauled and did general maintenance to vehicles, mainly farm machinery like tractors, etc. He also was a sales rep for an American company that sold tractors and tractor parts. This meant he spent most of his weekdays at the workshop, but a couple of times a month would travel up and down the Pacific coast of Colombia to give quotes, take orders, and make deliveries of parts to local farmers. Sometimes when delivering orders, he would pick up extra private work making repairs and doing maintenance on site. Uncle Jerry had his own boat to do all this traveling and said if his journey was taking him to where I would also be going, I could accompany him. He also said he would fix me up with a local guide to help me once he dropped me off, which would be most helpful. His other business venture, of course, was the guest house. He had bought it thinking it would eventually be a good investment, but it was taking a lot longer than he had imagined. When he had bought it, it needed a lot of renovation work. He had done a lot of it himself, but also with help from time to time from a local tradesman. Due to his financial situation, Uncle Jerry had sold his house in town, and refurbished the end of the guest house into a home for himself and Lupe. So far, he had renovated 5 of the guest rooms into what he termed a European standard. I guess he meant that those rooms were up to the expectations of paying European or North American guests. He was currently working on 2 more rooms. But it was at a very early stage. Lupe ran the guest house, cleaning the rooms and courtyard. Breakfast was included, but Lupe also did additional cooking and laundry for any guests if they required it, for an additional fee. Apparently, there was also a small pool out back, behind the end of the guest house where Lupe and Uncle Jerry lived, but guests were welcome to use it too. Finally, Lupe said I must be tired and would show me to my room. I collected my bags from where I had dumped them earlier at the front door. I accompanied Lupe out into the courtyard, where it was now dark. She took me up a staircase I had not seen previously, that went up to the second-floor veranda. Lupe went up first, and I followed her up closely behind. I wished this staircase went up 30 stories. Sadly, we reached the second floor far too soon, and I had to avert my stare so Lupe didn't catch me again. The veranda up here was a nice wide one. I noticed on the other veranda, across the courtyard, some other guests had chairs and a small table in front of their rooms. I guessed perhaps they sat out here and enjoyed the cool breeze on a hot day with a drink. Okay, Jack. You're going to be here in room 17, Lupe said as we moved down the veranda a little. Across the courtyard on the other veranda, an older gentleman appeared out of an unmarked door, wearing a dressing gown. He adjusted his little glasses, and then waved across to Lupe, and nodded to me. Hola, Mr. Cohen, Lupe said, good shower? Yep, going to bed now, good night, Mr. Cohen replied, in what I took to be an American accent, but couldn't be sure. See you tomorrow, Ms. Lupe, Mr. Cohen waved again. I noticed Lupe smiled at this. Okay, good night Mr. Cohen, she said, still smiling as Mr. Cohen disappeared into room 21 and closed the door. Lupe arrived in front of room 17. It was away from the street, with just room 18 between it and Uncle Jerry and Lupe's family home at the end of this U-shaped building. Lupe opened the door and I followed her in. It was a nice surprise, as it was very nicely, but simply decorated. It had a large comfortable-looking queen-sized bed, a large wardrobe, a desk and chair, and a small fridge. There was also a big mirror on one wall. The room had a large window that looked out over the veranda, and a smaller one on the opposite wall that looked out over what I assumed was the next door's property. "So, what do you think, Jack? It's okay for you?" Lupe asked, a little hesitantly. "Oh, it's great, very nice indeed. You and my uncle have done wonders with this place," I told her, because, I guess, the rooms I saw downstairs on my way in didn't look quite as inviting. "Ah, good, I'm glad you like it," Lupe beamed, obviously happy that I was happy. "Yeah, the rooms downstairs all need renovating. We didn't start on them yet." "Okay, I see," I replied. "This room 17, and a currently empty one, room 13 at the end up here, next to the road, those are the two best rooms we have. Because they have en-suite bathrooms," Lupe explained. "You saw across the way there, Mr. Cohen's room has been renovated, but his bathroom is next door, so you have to access it from the veranda." "Oh, so I'm a lucky one," I replied. "Yes, well, we charge slightly more for this one because of that. I hope that's okay with you?" Lupe asked with a smile, handing me the key to the room. "Oh, I'm sure it's fine, thank you," I told her. I was very much enjoying being alone with Lupe, just chatting. "My God, she was gorgeous. Come and see the bathroom," Lupe said and pointed off to the right of the room. She opened the bathroom door, and we stepped inside. It was very nicely done again, but also fairly simple. It had a toilet, a wash basin with a big mirror on the wall, and then a nice big shower area at the end. "You like?" Lupe asked, smiling again. As the entrance to the bathroom was a little cramped for two people, we were stood quite close together. I could now smell her lovely perfume, quite intoxicating. "Yes, lovely," I said, looking her in the eye. She giggled and motioned for us to move back out into the bedroom. Lupe showed me the fridge, and that it was full of soft drinks. Beer and water. She explained she would refill it every day and would bill me for my drinks at the end of the week. Lupe then showed me how to turn on the overhead fan, the TV, and the air conditioner. Lupe had to get down on all fours to fiddle with the air conditioning control panel. She looked back over her shoulder at me as she explained how to use the air conditioner. "Can you see?" Lupe asked, pointing to the air conditioner control panel. "Oh, I could see all right." Lupe's was an absolute masterpiece. Lucky old Uncle Jerry. I told Lupe I didn't quite get it the first time, and could she explain it again? Lupe smiled and nodded and went over her explanation again. As she leant forward on her hands and knees to reach the buttons, I was amazed she had not noticed that. Lupe finished her explanation, and I simply nodded. Lupe then stood back up. "So, Jack, the weekly rent is 225,000 pesos, your uncle told you that, right?" Lupe asked. I nodded. It sounded like an awful lot, but actually, 1 pound was 5,000 Colombian pesos. So, the weekly rent was only 45 pounds, or $60. But if you're gonna stay a long time, we have a discount for monthly renters, so that's 750,000 pesos. Did you want to book per month? I know you will be traveling around a bit, and using this as a base, but it might be nice to have somewhere permanent to leave some of your things. It's up to you though, Lupe explained, smiling. Lupe was a good businesswoman and was trying to get me to pay up front for a whole month. When in fact at least a couple of days each week I would probably be staying up and down the Pacific coast, and having to pay for individual nights elsewhere. But it did make sense to have somewhere to hang my hat, and not have to check in and out all the time. Plus, the monthly rent meant I would only be paying around 150 pounds, or $200. It was still really cheap, and paying a month up front meant I was saving a whole week's rent by my calculations. Yeah, monthly is fine, I told Lupe. I went to my backpack and pulled out my wallet and gave her the first month's rent up front. Okay, thank you, Jack, you know your uncle is very pleased to see you here. But we are also very happy to have another paying guest too. Lupe explained. How many other guests are there right now? I asked her. Just 2 others, it's been like that for months and months. Mr. Cohen you saw, he's across the way there, in room 21. And then another gentleman a couple of rooms down from Mr. Cohen, in room 24. And that's it, Lupe shrugged. I see, I replied. Oh, I forgot, don't use the air conditioner when you're not here. I should have mentioned before, each room is on a meter, and you have to pay what you used at the end of the month, Lupe explained. Don't worry, as long as you only use it when you're here, it's not very much at all. But you will get a big bill if you leave it on all the time. Okay. Understood, I told her, nodding. Alright, well, again Jack, we're very pleased to have you here. I hope you are going to enjoy staying here, Lupe said, smiling, and if you need anything, you just tell me. Anything at all, I mean it, okay? I nodded, and then Lupe came in for a hug. She put her arms around me. God, she smelt divine. I put my arms around her too, and hugged her back. But then the moment was over, and Lupe smiled, bid me good night, and stepped out of the room and the door closed behind her. I heard the click-clack of her high heels as she made her way back downstairs. Lupe was incredible, my uncle was such a lucky man. How on earth did he land such a foxy lady? He wasn't particularly handsome. And he certainly wasn't rich. But he was a nice guy, and sometimes that's all it takes. There was their age gap though. I had figured Lupe was about 35. That meant my uncle was almost 25 years older than his gorgeous wife. I wondered if that might be a problem for them when she was 45, and he was 70. I began unpacking my things and put on the air con as it was a bit stuffy now. I then took a warm shower. I watched the TV, but it was mostly local TV stations, and with my limited Spanish I gave up after a while. I had brought my iPad with me and had downloaded loads of movies and TV shows onto it to keep me entertained for this long trip, but I didn't feel like that either. I decided to take the chair from the desk, put it out on the veranda, and sit there for a while, taking in the evening air. I took a cold Coke from the fridge and sat out there for a half hour, slowly sipping it. It was nice and quiet here, there wasn't a lot of street noise, and my room was set way back from the road, making it even quieter. I was just about to make my way back into my room and head to bed when I did hear something that broke the silence. It was very quiet and rather muffled. But it was some kind of sound. I appeared to be coming from the end of the building, where Uncle Jerry and Lupe's section of the guest house. I stood up and moved closer. It was definitely coming from inside their home. I looked around to see if anyone could see me. The lights had gone out in room 21 where Mr. Cohen stayed, so presumably, he was asleep. Further down at room 24, the lights were out too, so I assumed the other guest Lupe had mentioned was either out for the evening or sleeping. I moved down the veranda, much closer to Lupe and my uncle's home section of the building. Their section was a 2-story self-contained home, with the kitchen and living room that I had already seen downstairs, and presumably bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, on this same floor. The windows that looked out from their upstairs rooms onto the veranda had wooden louved shutters over them. In fact, all the guest rooms had them too. Inside my room, there were also curtains. I now stood right in front of the shutters over the window from the room the sounds were coming from. It was definitely the sounds of a woman. I stood up against the door of room 18 and tried to peer through the gaps in the louved shutters. I could see light inside. No curtains had been drawn on the inside it seemed. But because of the angle of the shutters, I couldn't see anything worth spying on, only the ceiling inside. I was desperate to see a glimpse of what I suspected was going on in that room. I suspected that inside, just behind the shutters, Lupe. I reached out and slowly adjusted one of the shutters so that I could peer in. I was quite nervous, I didn't want to get caught, but temptation overtook me. I slowly peered in through the adjusted shutter. However, as I started to move the next shutter along, it gave out a very loud creak. I stopped immediately. I waited for a moment, but thankfully my uncle kept on Lupe regardless, so I assumed they had not heard it. Still better not tempt fate, and I gave up on my peeping. But as I turned to return to my room, I leant on the door of room 18, and the door swung open. I looked inside, it was dark, but I could see the room had been completely gutted, ready for renovation. I stepped inside, and went to the wall that shared with the bedroom of Lupe and Uncle Jerry. I guess the wall was very thin here because I could now hear everything going on in the bedroom just behind this wall. I stood there with my ear to the wall for a few minutes longer, but suddenly I heard noises from outside, in the courtyard. I went to the door and saw a man walking from the road up to the staircase to the second-floor veranda on the other side of the courtyard. I thought I had better not push my luck any further and quickly shot back to my room. Through the window from my own room, I saw the man reach the top of the stairs on the opposite veranda and go into room 24 and close the door behind him. He must be the other guest Lupe had told me about. It was very dark, so I could not make out any details about him. But he obviously hadn't seen me, which was the important thing. In the morning I awoke, showered and dressed, and headed out onto the veranda. Opposite, Lupe was delivering a tray of food to Mr. Cohen. "Hey Jack, come down to the kitchen," Lupe called over to me. I nodded and headed down the stairs, and into Uncle Jerry and Lupe's home. My uncle was at the kitchen table, Lupe came in from outside, and we sat and ate breakfast together. My uncle wore his work overalls and was soon off to his workshop. He offered to lend me his scooter, a little Honda 125 cubic centimeters. Uncle Jerry said it would be great for me to use to take a tour around town by myself. I could borrow it any time I wanted, he told me, as long as I kept it filled up with petrol. Gasoline was so cheap here, not like back home. I thanked him for the offer, and Uncle Jerry gave me a map of the local area. Lupe cleared away the dishes again. She was dressed more simply today, but still fairly pretty. She wore little black hot pants and a tight little white t-shirt. I decided whatever she wore, it must be impossible for her to not look as hell pretty. I imagined wherever Lupe went she must get pestered by men all the time. I wondered how Uncle Jerry felt about that. Soon it was time to start our day. Uncle Jerry kissed his wife goodbye. Then he was off to his truck and down to his workshop for the day. Lupe gave me the keys for the Honda scooter and told me to have a great day. "Will you be gone all day, Jack?" Lupe asked. "Yes, I suppose so, taking some photos. But I'll be back before it gets dark, I guess, otherwise, I might get lost," I replied. Lupe gave me her and Uncle Jerry's cell phone numbers in case I had any problems. I went and got my backpack from my room with my camera and a few other things. Then I got on the Honda scooter parked in the courtyard. As I drove off, I saw Lupe up on the veranda holding sheets and pillowcases, presumably going to clean one of the rooms. I spent the morning driving around town, getting to know the layout of the area. I even passed by my uncle's workshop outside of town and stopped by just for a few minutes to check it out. He was working on an old tractor, so I left him to it. After getting a simple lunch at a small roadside restaurant, I felt a little tired. Perhaps my travels were catching up on me, or maybe I ate too much. I decided to call it a day and headed back to the Casa Madre guest house. I arrived back at about 1:30 p.m. I thought I might take a snooze. I noticed Lupe had remade my bed and generally tidied up. But I thought I might sit outside on the veranda with a bottle of water for a moment. I sat there for a few minutes before I again heard the same sounds from the evening before. I strained to hear the barely perceptible sounds, again rather muffled, but definitely a woman. I assumed my uncle had returned home early and had decided to give Lupe some afternoon delight. I couldn't resist going down to the vacant gutted room 18 and listen to them again through the wall. However, as I moved along the veranda, I realized the noise was not coming from Uncle Jerry and Lupe's bedroom. It seemed to be coming across the courtyard, on the opposite veranda. I slowly walked around the veranda, past my uncle's home end of the building, and back up the other veranda. The noise seemed to be coming from room 21, where Mr. Cohen was staying. Perhaps Mr. Cohen had a local girlfriend and was giving her a seeing too. As I approached his room, I could see all the louved shutters were firmly shut, and also the curtains in the room were pulled across. I wasn't going to be able to peer in and see anything. However, Mr. Cohen's bathroom door was ajar. His bathroom was separate from the bedroom, I remember Lupe telling me. I opened the bathroom door and looked inside. It wasn't quite as nice as my bathroom, but it was acceptable. I thought maybe I could at least listen for a minute through the wall, even if I wouldn't be able to see who it was that he was with. I closed and locked the bathroom door quietly behind me. I then noticed the bathroom had a large section of glass bricks in the wall that separated it from Mr. Cohen's bedroom. The bricks were thick and distorted within, so you couldn't see much of the bedroom on the other side, but I suppose its purpose was to let some light into the bathroom from the bedroom. As there was no window in here. I had not turned the light on in the bathroom, so whoever was in the bedroom with Mr. Cohen would not be able to see my movement through the distorted glass bricks. I was correct about being able to hear through the wall. I could easily make out. "Oh God, yeah," Mr. Cohen moaned. I peered closer through the glass bricks. But the glass in the bricks was so distorted, deliberately so that someone in the bedroom couldn't see someone going to the toilet in the bathroom. It meant sadly I wasn't going to get to see much, it was just vague shapes really. Then suddenly I noticed a fairly large gap between the end glass brick and the wall, where the white putty should be. It was only maybe an inch wide, but it should be enough. I moved to the other end of the glass brick section of the wall. I peered through the hole, and got a hell of a shock, but a very nice shock all the same. In the bedroom beyond, was Lupe. I realized now Lupe was wearing a little schoolgirl outfit. She looked pretty, Mr. Cohen looked like he was in his late 60s. Not that my uncle would be too pleased if he knew what was going on right now under his roof. I wondered if this was a one-off thing, or a regular affair. I knocked an electric toothbrush off a small shelf, and it clattered into the wash basin. I froze. Mr. Cohen was oblivious. But Lupe herself immediately looked up. And looked directly at the wall. Perhaps she was looking through the small hole in the wall from her side, but she certainly seemed to be looking me straight in the eye. Could she see me? I couldn't see how. Surely the hole was too small. I then looked at the wall behind me, I was casting a shadow there. The light coming from the bedroom through the glass bricks was making my shadow appear there. Had Lupe seen my moving shadow through the glass bricks? Certainly, she would be able to see there was a small hole in the wall. Perhaps she could see the shadow and put two and two together, and decided she was being spied on. She still continued to stare at the wall. But then a grin spread across her face. She looked directly through the hole, and mouthed the words, "Naughty boy," at me, wagging her finger at the same time. She continued to stare in the same direction, directly at me, grinning like mad. She must have worked out who it was that was spying on her. If she thought it was my uncle, her reaction would have surely been very different. It might prove awkward between us later on. I assumed Mr. Cohen was so old his hearing was not what it used to be in his youth, which is perhaps why he hadn't heard me knock over the toothbrush. I noticed he wasn't wearing his glasses too, so probably couldn't see far beyond Lupe's. "Oh, I love you watching me," Lupe said, grinning right at me. I assumed Mr. Cohen thought that comment was directed at him. But I knew Lupe was sending me a message to say she was enjoying being watched. As this was his usual, it meant that this thing between Mr. Cohen and Lupe had gone on before, presumably many times. Finally, Lupe sat up. Okay, you enjoy yourself? Lupe asked. Mr. Cohen simply nodded, still trying to catch his breath. Well, I got to go, honey. But you take a breather before you take a shower, okay? Lupe told Mr. Cohen, but was looking directly at the hole in the wall, at me. I took that as my warning to get out of there. Then I left the hole in the wall, opened the bathroom door as quietly as possible, and crept back outside. I then shot around the veranda as fast as I could back to my room and shut the door behind me. I peered back out through the louved shutters. Lupe stuck her head out of Mr. Cohen's room and had a quick look around to check the coast was clear. Then she stepped out onto the veranda, closing the door behind her, past the bathroom I had been spying in, toward the family home section at the end of the building. She still wore her complete little schoolgirl outfit. But I guess it was a short walk back to her room, and no one was watching, apart from me of course. I sat back on my bed, marveling at what had just occurred. That a woman like Lupe was cheating on her much older husband perhaps wasn't so surprising. She could surely have any man she wanted though. I also thought about my uncle, working hard down at his workshop, blissfully unaware his gorgeous wife was playing away. Should I tell him what I had seen? I didn't want to upset my uncle, but then perhaps he deserved to know the truth. I couldn't decide what to do. I took a shower. I then finally took a nap and slept a couple of hours. Around 5 p.m. I awoke. I watched TV for a few minutes. Then I heard the distinctive click-clack sound of Lupe's high-heeled shoes coming down the veranda outside my room. Perhaps Lupe had had a change of heart about how she had felt about me spying on her. I stood up, feeling like a rabbit in headlights. Was she coming to angrily confront me? Was she going to throw me out? Or was she going to plead with me to not tell my uncle what I had seen? There was a knock at the door. I was dreading opening it, but I couldn't hide away. I opened the door. Lupe stood there, looking stunning as always. She wore a tight, light beige vest top. She had a very short tight blue jean skirt, and of course her high heels. Hey Jack, are you okay? Lupe asked, rather sheepishly. Yeah sure, I guess, I mumbled, trying to avoid eye contact. Aha. Okay, Jack, I think we need to talk, you know. Lupe said, leaning against the door frame. Well, I stuttered. I wasn't sure what to say, or where to look. Come on Jack, let me in. I promise I won't bite. Lupe smiled her winning smile. I just need to explain a few things to you before your uncle gets back. I nodded, opening the door further to let her in. Lupe stepped into my room, and the door closed behind her. I felt great anticipation, that my life here was about to drastically change. But would it be for better or worse? To be continued, copyright 2024 all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise state. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel.